There was a name that made Alphas go silent mid-sentence. Not the name of a warlord. Not the name of some ancient creature that had crawled out of the first winter with claws longer than memory and a hunger that had never once learned satisfaction. Not the name of a god or a ghost, or anything that lived inside the comfortable architecture of legend where terrifying things were supposed to stay. Visited only when you chose to visit them, safely contained in the past where they could not reach you. It was the name of a shadow that had moved through the ancient wolf packs of Vorrenmaar for 2 full generations. Patient, invisible, and devastatingly precise, leaving behind nothing except cold bodies and the particular silence that falls over a room when something powerful has been removed from it, suddenly and without warning. No Alpha had ever felt him coming. No warrior had ever caught his scent on the wind before the damage was already done. No guard rotation, no stone wall, no howled alarm had ever arrived in time to matter. The packs whispered that he had been born without a wolf inside him, that he carried no beast, felt no moon pull, answered to no Alpha, and no bond, and nothing living. That the moon herself turned her face away on the nights he worked, because even she did not want her light to illuminate what moved through the dark below her. For 2 generations he had travelled the territories of Vorrenmaar, like a slow poison, moves through blood, silent, undetected, irreversible. Every pack lord who had believed their walls were sufficient, their warriors sharp enough, their instincts finely tuned enough to catch a threat before it reached the throat, had been wrong. Had been wrong in the specific, final, unarguable way that dead wolves are wrong about the things they believed would save them. Until the night a silver-haired blade worker from a valley craftworker's quarter, a wolf of no rank, no combat commission, no political standing, and no reason to be inside the walls of the most feared Alpha stronghold in all the ancient territories, saw him, read him, and stopped him on the cold stone floor of a great feast hall in front of every ranked wolf in Vorrenmaar, using nothing except the devastating precision of a mind that had always seen what no one else could see, and a wolf inside her that had been waiting, without knowing it was waiting, for exactly this. Her name was Seren Vael. And the other thing. The thing that no story told around the pack fires ever included, the thing the formal records of Vorrenmaar had no vocabulary for, was what happened between her and the Alpha whose life she saved. What the mate bond did when it found 2 wolves who were both, for entirely different reasons, completely unprepared for it. What it cost them to resist it. What it cost them more to keep resisting it. What broke open between them in a small stone room in the pale mountain morning after the feast fires had burned to ash. That is also this story, and once you have heard it, it will not sit quietly in your chest. It will pace. It will prowl. It will press against your ribs the way a wolf presses against a fence when it knows, with every ancient instinct it possesses, that what it wants is on the other side. Before we go further, where are you right now? Drop your location in the comments, because wolves from every corner of this world have gathered here tonight, and I want to know exactly where you are joining us from. The valley pack of Iron Hollow sat between 2 mountain shoulders so old that the stone had gone dark with centuries of weather, and the trees along the approach road had grown into each other overhead, forming a canopy so dense that even in high summer the road beneath existed in permanent blue-green dusk. It was not the grandest pack in Vorrenmaar, not the most feared, not the most strategically significant on any warlord's territorial map. What it was old. Stubborn with the particular stubbornness of things that have outlasted everything sent to move them. In every wolf born inside Iron Hollow's walls understood rank before they could articulate the concept. It arrived in the blood early, the way the air changed texture when an Alpha entered a room, the way your shoulders pulled down without instruction, the way your eyes dropped before your mind caught up with your body. You did not learn this. It lived in the oldest part of the wolf inside you, the part that remembered running in packs across open ground under a full moon when hierarchy was not a social arrangement but a survival truth, as fundamental as breathing and twice as non-negotiable. Betas moved through the world with a sureness that adjusted everyone around them without effort. Alphas carried something heavier, a gravitational quality, a pressure in the air that reminded every submissive wolf in range of the order of things, constantly, without cruelty, simply as the condition. And then there were the wolves who lived at the bottom of all of that. Seren Vael had known what she was since the morning of her maturation, when the bond of her rank settled into her like the first snow of winter settles onto stone, quietly, completely, without asking how she felt about it. She had looked at the sky above the valley and breathed out slowly and accepted it with the clear-eyed practicality of a wolf who had always understood that energy spent fighting the shape of things was energy stolen from the work of living within them. She was lean and quick, with pale silver-white hair she kept braided flat against her skull and dark eyes that tilted at the outer corners and caught light at angles that made people faintly uncomfortable if she held their gaze too long. She had learned early to look slightly past people rather than directly at them. Not from submission. She had always been honest about the difference between submission and strategy. But because looking directly made people aware of being read, and Seren had always done her best work when her subjects did not know they were being studied. She lived in Iron Hollow's craftworker quarter near the eastern wall, in a narrow stone dwelling that smelled of tallow and pine resin, and the sharp metallic edge of fine tools. She restored blades, hunting knives with edges gone to nothing, ceremonial weapons with cracked guards, fighting blades whose handles had worked loose from their tangs, and were one hard use from failing their owners at the worst possible moment. And people brought her broken things and she made them whole, and they left without lingering, and she did not miss the conversation. Objects were honest. A fractured blade told you exactly where the stress had concentrated. A worn edge told you precisely how the blade had been used and misused. There was no performance, no social management, no careful presentation of a version of the truth shaped to protect the speaker. What Seren kept private, what she had kept folded tight inside her chest since childhood, like a map of territory she had never told anyone she possessed, was that she read people with the same precision she brought to damaged steel. She noticed the way Callum the Gate Beta touched his left knuckle when making a decision he was uncertain of. She noticed the way Elder Marin's breathing changed rhythm when someone told her something she already knew. She noticed the way strangers moving through the market assessed exits differently than locals. The rapid peripheral sweep, that subtle orientation of the body toward open space that said, "I am always calculating how to leave." She had no name for what this was. She had stopped looking for one. It had always been there, and it had always been useful, and she had always kept it quiet, because power that cannot be categorized made powerful people deeply uncomfortable. And uncomfortable, powerful people were the most dangerous kind. So she folded it away and fixed broken blades and believed, with reasonable certainty, that this was the shape her life would keep. Until the runner came. He arrived at dawn on a frost-heavy morning in late autumn. A young beta wearing the ash-grey and deep mountain blue of Duskwall's courier line, mud-caked to the knee, with the hollow look around his eyes of someone operating on something colder and more fundamental than energy. He went to Iron Hollow's pack Alpha first, as runners always did, and the message worked its way down through the Beta Council through the morning, and by midday it reached Seren in the form of a young errand girl who delivered it with the brisk efficiency of someone with 3 more tasks waiting. "Seren Vael, you're wanted at Duskwall. The runner says he won't leave without you. The message carries Corvan Ash's personal seal. The girl left. Seren set down the hilt she had been rewrapping and sat with the name for a moment. Corvan Ash. She had heard it the way everyone in Vorrenmaar heard it. As a name that moved through the territories ahead of its owner, the way a stormfront moved, so that by the time the actual thing arrived, you had already formed a shape for it in your mind, and the shape was never comfortable. He had ruled Duskwall and its surrounding mountain territories for 9 years. He combined a predator's instinct for direct confrontation with a strategic patience that unnerved enemies expecting one or the other and encountering both simultaneously. 4 assassination attempts. The 4th had ended with a rival council dismantled across 3 territories as a message about the cost of underestimating him. He was also said to be unmated, which for an alpha of his standing and his years, it was unusual enough to carry its own quiet weight in the way people talked about him. Seren packed her tool roll and put on her heavy travel wrap and followed the runner north toward the mountain road without asking permission from anyone and without explaining herself because she had not been in the habit of doing either for a very long time. The road to Duskwall climbed for 2 days through forests so dense the sky appeared only in narrow strips overhead. The runner's name was Evin, 19, beta ranked, better at silence than most wolves twice his age. Seren used the travel time the way she used all time, observing, filing, building her picture of where she was going from the traces the territory left on the approach. She noticed the absent scout position at the eastern canyon ridge, stored it. She noticed the quality of Evan's silence, the specific careful management of someone carrying information they had been instructed not to share. Filed it. She noticed that the prevailing wind had shifted recently, which meant the high passes above Duskwall had changed their pattern, which meant the mountain was doing something the stronghold's inhabitants would be managing. Duskwall appeared at the end of the 2nd day with the abrupt, total authority of a structure that had been built into the mountain rather than placed on it. Great curved walls of dark stone, following the natural rock contour so thoroughly that at distance it was genuinely difficult to locate where mountain ended and fortress began. Intentional, centuries intentional. The gate guard who received her, a broad beta female with the watchful economy of long service perimeter work, assessed her professionally rather than dismissively. Notable. Led her through the outer yard and into the main corridors without confusion. More notable. Moving through Duskwall's inner halls, Seren filed 3 things before she reached the room where Corvan Ash was waiting. The guard rotation was cycling at shortened intervals. Heightened alert. A section of the east corridor wall near the armory junction showed recently disturbed stonework, reset skillfully, but without enough time. Mortar still slightly proud of the surrounding surface. New work. 48 hours at most. And beneath the layered scents of a large working pack, cooking fires, weapon oil, the warm animal complexity of many wolves in close quarters, something else. Faint, cold, the specific sharp herbal edge of wolfsbane derivative, processed and concentrated, with no innocent explanation inside an interior corridor. She was still cataloguing all 3 when the guard opened the door and she walked through it, and her entire careful, methodical, professional system of observation simply stopped working. For 3 full seconds, she stood in the doorway of Corvan Ash's strategy room and felt everything she had built over a lifetime of disciplined, practical, unsentimental self-management come apart at its most fundamental seam. The mate bond did not announce itself gently. It hit her the way a wave hits a wolf standing at the shoreline. Not the elegant metaphorical wave of stories, but the real thing, the physical thing. Cold and enormous, and indifferent to her plans, knocking the breath clean out of her body and leaving her standing in its aftermath with salt in her lungs and the absolute certain knowledge that nothing was the same as it had been 4 seconds ago, and nothing would be again. Her wolf surged forward inside her with a force she had never felt from it before, pressing against her ribs, her sternum, the inside of her throat, everywhere simultaneously, straining toward the large, dark-haired wolf standing at the far side of the room with his back to the door. The recognition in it was violent and involuntary and ancient and completely beyond her authority to redirect. No, she told it, with the firmest internal voice she possessed. Absolutely not. Look at this situation. Look at who he is and what you are, and tell me with a straight face how this ends well. Her wolf did not dignify this with a response. It simply kept pressing. 3 seconds. She had 3 seconds before he turned, and she needed to have her face completely clear when he did. She breathed out through her nose slowly and pulled every piece of herself back into order with the focused, grim efficiency of someone dismantling a reaction before it could finish assembling. And by the time Corvan Ash turned away from the narrow window and his amber eyes found her across the room, she was standing straight and still with her tool roll in her hands and nothing on her face except attentive professional calm. He was large in the way of alphas who had not let authority soften them. A wolf who still moved like a fighter in a room with no threat in it. Ye with the physical economy of someone who had trained the body to waste nothing across many years. Dark hair close at the sides, a scar along the left jaw old and clean, and his eyes, when they found her, were the colour of storm-lit amber, sharp with intelligence and exhaustion, and beneath both of those things, something that she catalogued automatically and could not stop cataloguing. He was afraid. Not of her, not of anything in the room. He was afraid of something he could see coming and could not yet stop, in the specific way of a wolf who has spent 9 years being the most dangerous thing in every room he entered and has recently encountered a threat that his particular kind of dangerous cannot locate. She read all of it in 3 seconds, and in those same 3 seconds, she understood this later. When she had the distance to examine it, he was reading her, not with professional assessment, with something else, something that moved across his face and then got rapidly and deliberately controlled, locked behind the stone expression she would come to understand was his primary defense against anything that surprised him. His nostrils flared. Once. Involuntary. The wolf in him responding to what his body had found before his mind had decided how to handle it. She watched him get control of it. She watched the effort it cost. And she filed that too. He said, in a voice quieter than she had expected from a wolf his size, "You are Seren Vael of Iron Hollow." She said, "I am." He said, "You restore blades." She said, "I do." He moved away from the window and the air between them changed, and her wolf slammed against her ribs like it was trying to get through the bone by force, and she pressed back, and they were both going to be very mature and controlled about this, or she was going to leave. He sat on the edge of the stone table at the room's centre and looked at her steadily and said, "Someone inside Duskwall is going to make an attempt against my life. I believe it will happen at the Solstice Gathering Feast in 4 days. I believe the mechanism is already inside these walls, and I cannot find it." His voice was level in the way of someone who had been maintaining level for 11 days straight. "My warriors have found nothing. My protocols are the tightest in the territories." He paused. I have not slept fully in 11 days. He looked at her and said, "I was told that you see what others cannot see, that you find what cannot be found, that you have never been wrong about what you see." She said, "I will need to move freely. Every section of this stronghold, every hour, without escort and without explanation required." He said, "Permitted." She said, "Whatever I bring you, you act on it without requiring me to justify my rank before you will believe me." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. She looked away from it deliberately. He said, "Agreed." She turned to leave. Her wolf howled at her the entire length of the corridor. She ignored it with the determined discipline of a wolf who had been ignoring inconvenient internal pressures her entire life, though she was beginning to suspect this particular pressure was not going to respond to the usual techniques. That night, Seren sat on her travel mat in the small borrowed room near Duskwall's lower archive and conducted a frank internal accounting. The mate bond was real. She had felt it before, theoretically in the way you feel a thing you have heard described accurately enough that the description has prepared you for the reality. The reality was nothing like the description. The description did not include the specific way her lungs felt when she remembered standing in his doorway. It did not include the way her wolf kept returning to the memory of his scent, dark stone and cold mountain air, and something warmer underneath. Something that her wolf apparently found more important than everything else combined. It did not include the particular quality of his amber eyes when they had moved across her face, or the way his nostrils had flared before he could stop them, or the invisible thread she could feel even now, with 3 corridors and half the stronghold between them, pulling at the center of her chest with patient, relentless certainty. She breathed out slowly. After the feast, she told her wolf. Everything about this waits until after the feast. There is a man inside these walls planning to kill him, and I need every piece of what I am pointed at finding that man, and I cannot do that if I am occupied with this. Her wolf lay down with extreme reluctance. She took that as the closest thing to agreement she was going to get and went to work. Duskwall did not fully sleep. A large pack stronghold on elevated alert maintained a constant underlayer of activity through the deep hours, and Seren moved through all of it, beginning at the outer walls, working inward, learning the periphery before approaching the center. She found the first hidden preparation on the second night. In the inner passage connecting the central fire room to the preparation hall, hanging among a row of identical dried herb bundles from a ceiling hook, close enough to identical that any wolf moving through the passage would look past it without pause. She stopped beneath it and raised her nose and caught it through the outer wrapping. Cold, sharp. The specific herbal edge of processed wolfsbane derivative. She examined the cord tie without touching it and found the release mechanism, designed to loosen under accumulated heat, releasing the bundle's true contents into the passage air over several hours. Timed for the middle hours of a long feast. She left it exactly as she found it. On the third morning, she returned to the East Corridor junction and the disturbed stonework and worked the false panel free with a specific tool from her kit. Inside the cavity, she found a carved bone marker, no larger than her thumb. She held it under the corridor lamp, and the cold settled into her chest with the clean weight of certainty. She knew this symbolic system. She had encountered it once, in a documented intelligence compendium in Iron Hollow's archive, compiled by an old runner who had spent decades studying how shadow workers communicated with their contractors. The symbol on the marker's base translated precisely, approach confirmed, target accessible, proceed on given signal. Outbound confirmation traffic, active communication. Someone inside Duskwall was reporting the status of this plan to someone waiting outside the walls. She replaced the marker with absolute precision, smoothed the mortar, moved on. She found 2 more preparations across the following day, a contact trigger mechanism in the Undercroft passage and a concealed exit in the maintenance corridor behind the east-facing wall, a pivot door mechanism recently re-oiled, exiting through the mountain rock above the stronghold's eastern drainage channel. The escape route of someone who had planned every detail, including the departure. She found the wolf on the morning of the third day, not in the act. She had missed that window by hours. But she found him in his traces, in the behavioral pattern he had left on the space across 3 days of careful observation. She had built a complete movement map of every wolf in Duskwall. One wolf's pattern deviated from their stated role in 3 specific ways that were individually explainable and collectively unmistakable. Varsek, senior warrior, 15 years in Duskwall's service, Decorated, trusted. Placed, she calculated from the signal marker's communication interval, at least 2 years ago, by someone with the patience and resources to embed an asset and wait. She went to find Corvan. She found him in the lower strategy room. He looked up when she entered, and for one unguarded moment, before the stone expression reassembled itself, something moved across his face that had nothing to do with professional attention, something quicker and deeper and less authorized. And her wolf felt the thread between them pull taut, and she felt her own heartbeat change, and she looked at the side of his jaw, and breathed through it, and crossed the room, and stood before him. She told him everything. The herb bundle and its release mechanism, the signal marker and its meaning, the outbound communication, the internal contractor, the undercroft preparation and the contact trigger, the hidden exit, and finally Vasek, his name, his movement pattern, her reasoning, her certainty. She told him all of it in the level-precise voice she used when explaining fracture patterns to clients. When she finished, the room was quiet. Corvan had not moved once while she spoke. He said, "How certain?" She said, "Completely." He held her gaze and she held his, and the room was still, and his amber eyes were doing something she could feel across the distance between them, something warm and searching that pressed against her, the way his wolf's awareness was pressing against the air, and she needed him to stop doing it, and she was absolutely not going to tell him that. He said, "What do you need?" She said, "Nothing changes. No guard moves. No protocol shifts. Nobody in this stronghold knows what I've told you except you. The signal marker stays in the wall. The herb bundle stays on its hook." He said, "You want to let the plan run?" She said, "If it disappears, Vasek adjusts. Whatever he plans next is unknown territory. Unknown territory is more dangerous than a threat already mapped." He said quietly, "Ash, you're asking me to trust you." She looked at him directly, into those tired storm-amber eyes, and said, "Yes." The fire in the small hearth settled. The mountain wind pressed against the outer stone. Corvan looked at her for a long time, and she stayed very still and let him look because she had nothing to hide and she wanted him to be able to see that. Then he nodded once. She turned to leave. He said, "Seren." She stopped, did not turn around. Turning around felt dangerous. He said, "Be careful in these corridors. Not everyone in this stronghold is who they appear to be." She said, "I know. That is why you sent for me." And she walked out. In the corridor, alone. She pressed her back against the stone wall and breathed out slowly, and allowed herself exactly 10 seconds to feel the full force of what the mate bond was doing to her chest before she folded it back down and kept moving. Her wolf gave her the 10 seconds without argument. Then it went back to pacing. The day before the feast, Seren was moving through the lower undercroft in the blue pre-dawn hour when she heard it. A sound from the maintenance passage, the scrape of the pivot door moving in its housing, followed by footsteps, soft and deliberate and moving with the specific unhurried confidence of a wolf who believed they were completely alone. She pressed herself into the shadow of the undercroft's deep storage alcove and went absolutely still in the way that her wolf, when properly engaged, could make her still. Not the stillness of holding herself motionless, but the deeper stillness, the one that went all the way down into the predator's ancient patience, where breathing slowed and heartbeat quieted and the body became part of the darkness around it. Vasek moved through the undercroft 6 feet from where she stood. She had seen him from a distance across the stronghold's yards and halls over 3 days of observation. She had built his behavioral pattern from distance and traces. This was the first time she had been close enough to read him fully, and what she read made her wolf go rigid inside her with something between recognition and fury. He was good, profoundly, carefully good. The way he moved, the weight distribution, the angle of his head, The quality of his peripheral awareness was the movement of a wolf who had been doing this specific kind of work for a very long time and had refined every component of it to something close to perfection. He carried his danger the way the most dangerous things carried it, invisibly, folded completely into the appearance of ordinariness. He passed within arm's reach of her alcove without pausing, and her wolf went so still inside her it seemed to stop breathing, and she stayed motionless until his footsteps had moved up the undercroft stairs and out. Then she breathed out and understood, in the full and completed way she had not quite understood it before, the true shape of what Vasek had built. The herb bundle was not the killing mechanism, it was the distraction. The thing that would pull every guard's attention toward the passage in the confusion of the third hour and create the window, 4 seconds, perhaps 5, in which Vasek would be close enough and the hall would be loud enough and disordered enough that a blade placed correctly would end Corvan Ash before the feast had finished registering the danger. She had found the tools and the preparations and the wolf. She had seen the layers. She had still been one piece short of the whole picture until this moment. She pressed her back against the alcove wall and made the decision, not the safe one, not the small one. And then she went to prepare herself for tomorrow night, while the solstice gathering began at sundown, when the fire pits blazed and the oil lamps burned in every bracket along Duskwall's great hall walls, and wolves from every pack owing allegiance to Corvan Ash filled the long stone tables. Alphas and betas and their retinues in their finest seasonal colours, carrying the particular charged energy of wolves who had travelled through mountain cold to reach a place of warmth and fire and the ancient comfort of pack authority made visible and abundant. The hall was extraordinary on these nights, every surface warm, the smell of roasted grain and pine smoke, and dark winter wine rolling through the air in waves, the sound of hundreds of wolves talking at once, building into that deep communal music that lived in the oldest part of every wolf present, the particular bone-deep resonance of pack, warmth, safety, belonging. It was exactly the kind of night designed to make every wolf inside those walls believe that nothing wrong could enter a place this bright and this certain of itself. Seren had been in position since before the first guest arrived. She stood near the junction of the side passage and the preparation hall, holding a tool roll that gave her reason to move slowly anywhere in the room. Plain wrap, pale hair braided flat, nothing about her surface that said anything except working wolf, no particular interest. Look elsewhere. She had been doing this her entire life, and she was exceptionally good at it. She found Vasek within the first 10 minutes. He was along the inner wall where lower-ranked attendants gathered, looking exactly as he always looked, unremarkable, relaxed, utterly still in the way of things that are set and waiting. His eyes moved through the hall in those slow, deliberate sections that she recognized now, covering the room methodically, reading angles and distances with the eyes of a wolf, measuring the geometry of what he was about to do. She moved her own gaze away from him immediately. And then, because her wolf made it impossible not to, because the thread between them pulled with the patient relentlessness of a tide, she looked at Corvan. He sat at the head of the central table in the full authority of what he was, broad and still, amber eyes making their slow professional rounds of the room. He was wearing deep charcoal and the dark blue of Duskwall's formal colours, and the firelight moved across the angles of his face, and her wolf pressed against her ribs with everything it had, and she pressed back, and neither of them was winning this particular argument cleanly. He did not look at her. They had agreed on this. His eyes finding her across the feast hall would be precisely the wrong note that Vasek had trained himself to catch. But once, in the second hour, when his sweep of the room brought his gaze near her position at the passage entrance, she felt it before she saw it, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire pits, a pull in her sternum like something hooked and drawing, involuntary and enormous. Her heartbeat changed. Her wolf went straight to the front of her chest and pressed its nose against the barrier between them with absolute undignified longing. His gaze moved past her position. She breathed. Her wolf did not calm down. She looked at the floor and breathed deliberately through the wave of it, and when she raised her eyes again, she was composed and her face was clear, and the mate bond was back in its box where it was going to stay until the feast was finished. After, she told her wolf, with less firmness than she would have liked. Everything after. The fire pits burned lower as the night deepened and the kitchen workers made their trips to the wood store. Seren counted every trip, tracking which part of the fuel stack each load came from, knowing exactly how many remained before the passage conditions would reach the trigger threshold for the herb bundle's release. She watched Vasek between trips. On the third trip, the quality of his stillness changed. Something gathering beneath the surface, invisible to any eye, not specifically calibrated to read it. His sections of the hall were narrowing, concentrating, focusing down from the full room to a specific part of it, the part that contained the back of Corvan Ash's neck. She felt the fine hairs on her arms rise and stay risen. She looked at the passage entrance. The air near it had changed. The cold herbal sharpness was present now, thin but real, beginning its drift into the warm currents of the hall. The mechanism was live. She set her tool roll down on the nearest surface and moved. 3 days of walking this hall. Every step of the distance memorized, every angle of approach rehearsed in her body until it had settled below the level of thought into the machinery of muscle and bone and the deep predator focus of the wolf inside her, which was fully awake now and absolutely clear-eyed and not remotely interested in being quiet. She came at him from the right and slightly forward, closing the last distance in 3 steps, and drove her left shoulder into his right side with the full focused weight of her body at closing speed. Vasek went sideways. She went with him, controlling the fall, bringing him to the floor in a managed drop. She took his wrist as they went down and applied the joint lock, specific, practiced, and his right hand opened, and the blade in it rang against the stone floor with a small, clean sound that the feast swallowed entirely. She held him. He was stronger than her and trained in ways she was not trained, and he used everything immediately, efficiently, without panic. She had the position and the joint control and 3 days of knowing exactly how this floor worked, and she held him while his efforts told her, with the honest clarity, that physical resistance always carried, exactly how much he had left. It was not enough. The sound reached the nearest table in 4 seconds. Someone looked down. And what came out of that? Someone went through the hall the way sound like that always went. Fast. Total. In every direction at once. And the feast disintegrated into standing wolves and drawn blades, and the sharp ring of metal leaving sheaths all around the room. Guards reached her within moments and pulled her upright and took the blade from her tool roll's outer pocket and held her between 2 large bodies, and she let them because she had expected this, and it changed nothing that mattered. She stood held between 2 senior warriors in the middle of the great hall of Duskwall with every ranked wolf in Vorrenmaar watching, and she kept her face clear and her breathing slow, and she waited. Corvan was already moving. He had risen the instant the sound went through the room, and he was crossing the hall now, and the crowd was parting ahead of him without being asked. And his face was the controlled stone she had learned was his default defense. But his eyes were not controlled. His eyes were doing something she had never seen in them across 3 days of careful observation. Something that was not professional calculation and was not alpha authority and was not the exhausted sharpness of a wolf who had not slept in 11 days. His eyes were wolf gold, not amber, not the warm storm amber she had catalogued on the first night. Gold. The deep, bright, involuntary gold of an alpha's wolf rising fully to the surface, overriding the human expression, bypassing every careful layer of control he had built over 9 years of ruling the most dangerous territory in the mountains. She had done that. She understood it with a certainty that moved through her like a current. The mate bond had done that. His wolf had seen her held by 2 of his warriors, and something in him had risen past the point where the man had authority over it. He stopped in front of her. He looked at the guards holding her, and they looked at him, and the wolf gold in his eyes was enough. It was more than enough. And they released her arms and stepped back quickly, and she understood from their expressions that they had never seen their alpha's eyes do that before. And then it was just Corvan and Seren, in the centre of the great hall, with every ranked wolf in Vorrenmaar, watching from every direction. He looked at her. The gold was fading back to amber as he got his wolf under control, but the effort of it was visible in the set of his jaw, in the tension across his shoulders, in the deliberate measured quality of his breathing. He said very quietly, so that only she could hear it clearly, "Are you hurt? Not what happened, not explain yourself, and not anything that protocol or rank or the observation of an entire hall of witnesses would have suggested. Are you hurt?" She said, "No." Something moved through him at that word, something that loosened slightly in his jaw and his shoulders and somewhere deeper than either of those things, and she felt it through the mate bond like a vibration through stone, relief, pure and total and entirely beyond his authority to conceal from her at this distance. He held her gaze for one long moment that contained everything neither of them was saying in a room full of witnesses, and then he turned to face the hall. His voice, when he used it for the room, was the voice that ended conversations. This wolf mapped a 3-layer assassination approach that has been inside these walls for 2 years. She located every element of it, or identified the wolf running it, and chose the moment of its resolution with a patience and a precision I have not witnessed in 9 years of ruling this territory. He looked across the assembled wolves. She did it without rank, without commission, without authorization from anyone in this hall. A pause. She did it because she is the kind of wolf who sees what is true rather than what is ranked, and because what she found needed to be stopped, and she was the one standing in the position to stop it. He looked back at her. He said, "You saved my life, Seren Vael." She looked at the side of his jaw for a moment, and then she looked directly into his eyes. Back to amber now, controlled, but with something warm and ungovernable still moving at the very edges. And she said, "I mend broken things. It is what I do." Something happened in his face at that, at the edges of it, at the carefully maintained places that did not usually allow warmth. Something broke through and he did not entirely stop it, and she saw it clearly and could not pretend she had not seen it. He said very softly, "Yes, you do." And the hall breathed again, all at once, like something enormous had been held and released. They questioned Vasek through the night in the lower chamber, and by the blue pre-dawn hour, his answers had assembled themselves into a picture that Corvan read, standing at the strategy table, read again, and set face down on the stone because some pictures required a moment of darkness before they could be carried into action. The hiring chain ran back through 6 intermediaries to a name Corvan knew. A wolf who had sat at his council table for 7 years. A name he had trusted. Seren was not present for this accounting. She was in her small room near the lower archive, sitting on her travel mat with her tool roll open before her and her hands loose in her lap, thinking about the mountain road back to Iron Hollow, the narrow stone dwelling near the eastern wall, the smell of tallow and pine resin. The blade left half wrapped on her bench, set at the exact angle she would need when she returned. She was thinking about these things the way she thought about all problems. Directly, honestly, without flinching from the parts that were uncomfortable. The mate bond was not going to stop. She had understood this in a theoretical way before tonight. She understood it with her entire body now. She had stood in the middle of that hall and seen Corvan Ash's eyes go wolf gold because his wolf had seen her held and had risen past every careful control he had ever built. And the thing that had moved through her when she understood what she was seeing had not been anything she could categorize as professional or manageable or subject to the usual techniques. She was thinking all of this, sitting with it honestly, when the knock came at her door. Not Evan, not a guard, not an advisor. Corvan Ash stood in the doorway of her small room in the pale, earliest mountain morning, without the formal weight of the hall behind him. Just a large, tired wolf with dark hair, unbound, and amber eyes that had not slept and were not going to apologize for it. He stood looking at the small room and the travel mat and the tool roll on the floor and her sitting in the middle of it all. And something in the way he stood in the doorway, something in the specific quality of how he was looking at her, made her wolf press forward so hard and so suddenly that she felt it in the backs of her knees. He said, "May I come in?" She said, "Yes." He came in. He sat on the stone ledge beneath the narrow window because the room offered nothing else, his large frame folding to fit the space. He looked at the mountain dark outside for a moment, and then he looked at her and he said, "The traitor on my council will be removed before midday." She said, "I know." He said, "How long did you know it was him?" She said, "Third morning. The signal marker's placement indicated advisor-level access. The symbology is a Northern Territories system. Your advisory council has one member with Northern Territories posting background. It was not ambiguous." He said, "You sat with that for 2 days." She said, "Yes." He said, "Alone." She said nothing, because it was simply what had been required. He looked at her hands on her knees for a long moment. Then he looked at her face, and she watched him make a decision. Watched him cross some internal line he had been standing at the edge of since the first night. And his voice when he spoke next was quieter than it had been in any of their previous conversations. Stripped of the professional framing, just the thing itself, plain and direct. He said, "I need to say something, and I need you to let me say it before you answer." She said, "All right," he said. "The night you walked into my strategy room, I felt the mate bond. I want you to know that I know you felt it too, because I watched you feel it, and I watched you get control of it in approximately 3 seconds, and I have been..." He stopped, started again. "I have been trying to respect what you are here to do, and not make it more complicated than it already was. But I watched you stand in that hall tonight alone with everything you knew and everything you'd found and do what you did, and my wolf went past the edge of what I had authority over, and I need to..." He stopped again. The jaw was tight. She could see the effort of this on him, on a wolf who had ruled alone for 9 years and had the kind of careful self-possession that 9 years of that specific kind of responsibility built, are being asked by the mate bond to set all of that down and say the unsaid thing directly. She said quietly, "I know. I felt it when your eyes changed." He looked at her directly. "I could not stop it," she said. "I know. I have not been unable to stop something in 9 years." She said, "I know that too." He breathed out through his nose slowly. She watched him sit with the unfamiliar territory of it. This wolf who thought 3 moves ahead of every situation, reduced by the mate bond to someone who could not think past the next breath when she was close enough for his wolf to find her through the air between them. She understood this. She had been living the same experience from the other direction for 3 days. She said, "I told myself after the feast that everything about this waited until after the feast." He said, "And now it is after the feast." She looked at him directly, into those amber eyes with the intelligence and the exhaustion and the thing that had been winning the argument with the controlled expression since the first night, and had finally definitively won it. She said, "Yes, now it is after the feast." The room was very quiet. The mountain wind outside was the only sound. The pale morning light was beginning to find the window behind him, the first grey edge of it, laying itself across the stone floor between them in a thin, clean line. He rose from the stone ledge, one movement, unhurried, and crossed the small distance of the room, not all the way, not rushing, just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him and catch the full weight of his scent. Dark stone and cold mountain air, and that warmer undercurrent that her wolf had been cataloguing obsessively for 3 days, and stood before her. She rose from the travel mat. They stood in the centre of the small room in the earliest mountain morning, with the pale light finding them both, close enough that the mate bond was no longer a thread pulling from a distance, but a presence filling the space between them, warm and enormous, and no longer even slightly interested in being argued with. He raised one hand and touched her jaw with the backs of his fingers. Barely contact, the most careful thing she had ever felt from a wolf his size. And the breath left her body on a sound she had not planned to make, quiet and involuntary. And her wolf went from pressing at her ribs to something quieter and more devastating, the stillness of a wolf that has finally, after a very long time, arrived where it was always going. His eyes were amber and warm, and entirely unguarded in a way she suspected very few wolves had ever seen them. He said very low, "Stay in Duskwall." She said, "I had conditions." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Real warmth, uncontrolled, the kind that changed the whole architecture of a face. He said, "Name them." She said, "A seat at the full inner council, not advisory, full council with decision authority." He said, "You will have it." She said, "Unrestricted access to every section of these walls at every hour. No escort, no explanation required." He said, "Agreed." She said, "I will not carry a rank designation. Rank categories create predictive assumptions, and predictive assumptions reduce my effectiveness." He held that one for a moment. She could see the institutional weight of the concession sitting on him. Then he said, "Agreed." With the gravity of a wolf who does not commit to things he does not intend to honour. She looked at him. He looked at her. The morning light widened across the floor between them. She said, "And the other thing?" He said, "What other thing?" She said, "This." And she held his gaze steadily and let him see everything in her face that she had been keeping carefully folded since the first night. The full, unguarded truth of what the mate bond had been doing to her, and what she had thought about it, and what she had decided in the honest accounting she applied to everything. "This is not something I am willing to manage indefinitely. I am practical. I am not made of stone." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he made a sound low in his chest. Not words, not quite a growl. Something between those two things. Something that was his wolf speaking more directly than his voice. And he said, "Neither am I. As you may have noticed when my eyes stopped cooperating with my intentions in front of every ranked wolf in my territory." She said, "I noticed." He said, "It has never done that before." She said, "I know." He said, "You are the only wolf that has ever made my wolf do something I did not choose." She held his gaze and said, "Good," and she meant it completely. He exhaled, and the last of the controlled stone expression that had been his face for 3 days simply let go. And what was underneath it was tired and real and entirely unguardedly his, and it was the most honest face she had seen in Duskwall, and she had been reading faces her entire life. He said, "Stay." She said, "Yes." That was the agreement, both of them, made in a small stone room near the lower archive in the pale mountain morning, with no ceremony, no witnesses, no record in the formal registers of Vorrenmaar. The professional agreement and the other one, the older one, the one neither of them had chosen, and neither of them was going to fight anymore. What happened next, did not happen all at once, and it did not happen simply. The council traitor was removed before midday, as Corvan had said. The formal proceedings were conducted with the precise, controlled efficiency of an alpha who had 9 years of experience ensuring that rot was cut out cleanly before it could spread. Vasek was sent to the territorial justice process. The signal chain was severed. And Seren Vael took her seat at the inner council table of Duskwall's Great Hall. At Corvan Ash's left hand, in the plain afternoon light of the day after the solstice feast, with no ceremony because neither of them was interested in ceremony, with no formal announcement because the hall full of wolves who had watched the previous night's events had already assembled their own understanding of what had happened and why. The council wolves received her with varying degrees of equanimity, the senior warriors with the pragmatic acceptance of wolves who had watched her stop what they had not been able to find. The advisors with more careful expressions, the expressions of wolves recalibrating their understanding of the power arrangement around them. She did not need their comfort, she needed their information. She began asking for it immediately and precisely, and without softening the directness of the questions, and within 2 days the council had developed a working understanding of what she was there for and how she worked and why Corvan had placed her where he had placed her. What they did not fully understand, what the formal record of Duskwall would not have a vocabulary for, was the other thing. The thing that lived in the particular quality of the silence between her and their alpha in a council meeting. The thing in the way his amber eyes moved to her face when something complex was being discussed, with a quality of attention that was not the alpha assessing a resource. The way she occasionally touched the back of his hand when they were bent over the same map, and neither of them acknowledged the contact, and neither of them moved away from it. The mate bond was not announced. It did not need to be. Wolves understood what they were seeing. They felt it in the air of the council chamber the way they felt weather changing. That subtle shift in atmospheric pressure that required no explanation, only acknowledgement. Corvan was not a wolf who displayed vulnerability easily. He had spent 9 years building the specific kind of authority that rested on unwavering self-possession, on being the most certain presence in any room he entered. The mate bond was not compatible with that kind of unwavering self-possession, and he was aware of this and he chose it anyway, which was, she understood, the most significant thing he had ever chosen in 9 years of significant choices. She caught him watching her once 3 days after the feast, when she was moving through the outer yard reading the guard rotation for the post-incident security review. She looked up and found his amber eyes on her from the high window of the strategy room, and he did not look away when she found him looking, and the warmth that moved through her at that, the specific, simple, devastating warmth of being seen by the wolf, who was also your wolf's certainty, sat in her chest for the rest of the afternoon like the sun through clean glass. She told her wolf, "I know. I know." Her wolf was insufferably satisfied about all of it. They would tell this story for a long time after. They would tell it in Duskwall and in the valley packs, and in the territories that bordered Vorrenmaar, and then further. It passed along trade roads and messenger routes until it reached places where the name of Duskwall had arrived only as rumour. They would tell it the way the truest stories were always told, not as a lesson exactly, not as a warning exactly, but as a thing that happened and mattered and refused to be made smaller by the retelling, no matter how many times the retelling happened. They would say that the most feared alpha in the ancient mountain territories had been saved not by his warriors, and not by his walls, and not by any of the exceptional loyal, battle-hardened wolves who had spent their lives training to stand between him and whatever came for him in the dark. They would say he had been saved by a silver-haired blade worker from a valley craftworker's quarter. A wolf with plain wraps and steady hands and dark tilted eyes that caught light at angles that made people uncomfortable, who had walked into a mountain stronghold with a tool roll and no rank, and no authorization from anyone, and had found what 15 years of trained warriors could not find, and held it steady in her hands for 3 days without flinching, and placed herself at the exact point of intersection when the moment required it. They would say she had sat afterward at the inner council table of Duskwall's great hall, reading the room in that slow, particular way she had always read rooms, from the edges inward, finding the fracture lines and the hidden stresses, the things moving beneath surfaces before they could rise and do their damage. Or they would say that Corvan Ash, the Alpha who had ruled alone for 9 years and built his authority on a self-possession that had never once failed him, had looked across a strategy room at a silver-haired blade worker with steady hands, and his wolf had gone past every border he had ever built, gold-eyed and certain, and had not come back. They would say the mate bond between them was not a soft thing. It was not the comfortable warmth of a thing easily found. It was the specific kind of bond that formed between two wolves who had both spent a very long time alone in their particular kinds of strength, who had met each other in the middle of a crisis that required everything they each possessed, and had recognized in the other the only wolf in the territories who could match what they were without flinching from it. And every wolf who heard the story understood, without it needing to be said directly, what it meant for Vorrenmaar. What it meant to have an alpha whose strength was direct confrontation and deep strategic patience, paired with a wolf whose strength lived in the spaces between the visible and the invisible, in the places where threats assembled themselves before any conventional eye could locate them. They were the thing the territories had not known they needed, until the night they had almost lost everything, not having it. Seren Vael of Iron Hollow, the blade worker who saw the whole of it, the wolf who saved a king and sat at his left hand and read the world the only way she had ever known how to read it, completely honestly without apology, from the places that other eyes slid past without stopping. She kept her tool roll at the council table. Old habit. The weight of it was familiar, and she found familiar things useful in unfamiliar circumstances, and the council chamber of Duskwall was still, some mornings, an unfamiliar circumstance. She never went back to the craftworkers' quarter in Iron Hollow's eastern wall. But on nights when the mountain wind came through Duskwall's upper vents, carrying pine resin and cold stone, she felt the pull of where she had come from, and she let herself feel it because remembering what it had cost to live small kept her sharp about the cost of allowing anyone else to live small inside the walls she now protected. Sharp was what she had always been. Sharp was what she would always be. The moon kept its slow silver rounds above Duskwall's mountain peaks, cold and ancient and precisely indifferent to rank. The solstice fires burned down to their deep red coals and were banked and lit again with each new season. Corvan Ash ruled the mountain territories, and his mate sat at his left hand, and together they saw what neither could have seen alone. And the stronghold stood unbreached. Until the morning a sealed message arrived from a courier Seren did not recognize, wearing colours she had never seen on any pack road in Vorrenmaar. She was alone in the council chamber, Corvan in the outer hall receiving territorial reports. She held the sealed message and looked at the mark pressed into the wax, and her wolf went completely still inside her, with the specific quality of stillness it reserved for things that required its total and undivided attention. She knew this mark. Not from any intelligence catalogue, not from any archive document or runner's compendium or decades-old intelligence file. She knew it from a single source. The documentation of a shadow worker the official records of Vorrenmaar listed as killed in action 3 winters ago, in Duskwall, on a night before her arrival. She turned the message over in her steady hands and looked at the seal again, and the cold certainty arrived fully formed, the way certainty always arrived in her, without announcement, without the courtesy of being gradual. The wolf the record said had died 3 winters ago in Duskwall had not died, had gone quiet, had waited, had been watching everything she had done in this stronghold across the past 4 months. She set the message down on the council table without opening it and looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds she understood the full shape of what she was holding. Not just the message, but everything around the message, the architecture of it, the patience of it, the specific and devastating intelligence of a shadow worker who had watched one careful, thorough, perceptive wolf dismantle an elaborate plan and had spent the 4 months since building something that accounted for exactly what she had done and exactly how she had done it. This had been constructed for her to find. She raised her head and looked at the council chamber door and then at the corridor beyond it. The corridor was empty, every guard position vacant, the oil lamps burning in their brackets along the length of a passage that had not, in 4 months of living inside these walls, been empty at any hour she had walked it. Her wolf was no longer still. It was moving in her chest with urgent, desperate purpose, pressing toward the outer hall, toward Corvan with everything it had. She rose from the council table and she ran, not away from the empty corridor. Through it, toward the outer hall, toward the sound of voices still audible through the stone, his voice steady and measured, the voice she had been listening to across a council table for 4 months and had come to know the way she knew the grain of good steel. Present, real, alive. She hit the outer hall door with her shoulder and it swung open and he was there, standing at the territorial map with 2 of his senior advisors, and he looked up when she came through the door and his eyes found hers and she watched his entire expression change in the space of a single breath as he read her face, and his hand was already moving toward the blade at his hip before she had said a single word. Because he knew her face by now. He knew what it looked like when she had found something. He said, "What?" she said. "Clear the room. Right now. And tell me where your most trusted guard has been for the last 30 minutes. And the look that moved between them in the space of that sentence, across the 4 months of the council table, and the mate bond, and the pale mountain morning, and everything they had built in the territory between what they were professionally and what they were to each other, was the look of 2 wolves who had seen the same thing simultaneously and understood, without needing the words for it, that what was coming was larger than the last time, and that they were going to face it, this time, together. The mountain wind pressed against the outer stone of Duskwall. The moon was still above the peaks, the fires were still burning in the hall below, and the story that the Pax had thought was finished had not even reached its deepest note yet. Far below, and in the drainage channel cut into the mountain rock above Duskwall's eastern wall, in the concealed opening that Seren had found and reported and believed had been sealed 4 months ago, a figure stood very still in the mountain dark, waiting. The pivot door above the channel had not, after all, been the only exit. It had simply been the one she was meant to find.